When a little girl, barely 2.5 years old, walked onto a theater stage, she did not whisper or hide shyly behind an adult. She sang loudly and clearly, projecting with a massive force that made people instantly turn their heads. She was billed simply as Baby Gum, and she performed her routines right between movie screenings, while the crowds waited. People often assume famous stars arrive from nowhere with a lucky break, but before this tiny girl ever became the Hollywood icon Judy Garland, her life was already shaped by an intense family tug-of-war. One side of her family pulled aggressively toward the applause, while the other side pulled toward protection and control. Her father, Frank Gum, possessed a fine southern tenor voice and a deep love for the fast-moving stage world of vaudeville. He passed that rare musical gift directly to his daughter, and it showed up so early it almost looked like magic. But that gift was an inheritance wrapped in danger. Frank became the person Judy later credited as her absolute protector against exploitation. She needed a shield because her mother, Ethel, possessed a ruthless ambition for her daughters to succeed in show business. Frank stood between his young daughter and that crushing pressure, fostering her prodigiously raw, emotive singing style that sounded adult-like even when she was a toddler. Frank Gum understood pressure perfectly because his own life started inside a very different kind of survival story. Long before he ran a theater or protected a famous daughter, he was a boy born in 1886 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. His family belonged to a small, rural working-class hamlet that was literally called Gum. The men in his family worked physically demanding jobs as brick masons and farm laborers. They carried a simple tradition of naming their eldest sons William, passing the identity down like a rope from one generation to the next. Frank's grandfather was John Alexander Gum, and his father was William Tecumseh Gum, a man born in 1859 who carried the family's modest heritage forward. They worked with their hands, tied tightly to the local soil and the local cemeteries filled with Gum kin. But in 1895, when Frank was only 9 years old, his mother died. That tragedy left the household deeply impoverished. The old survival system collapsed, and Frank's life could have ended up strictly tied to farm labor. Instead, a wealthy man intervened. His godfather, George M. Darrow, lived in Oakland Mansion, a grand estate known historically as the site of a Confederate surrender. Darrow was an Episcopalian with money and real power as the treasurer at St. Paul's Church. He recognized the 9-year-old boy's incredible vocal talent. Darrow arranged for Frank to sing choir solos at the church, pulling a poor child forward and giving him a platform. By 1899, Darrow secured a choral scholarship for Frank to attend Sewanee Grammar School. That critical support kept going, carrying Frank through continued studies at Sewanee College until 1907. A godfather's wealth and a boy's singing voice built a permanent bridge out of rural poverty. Frank built a respectable adult life working as a court reporter, a stenographer, and a theater performer in Tennessee. But those jobs came with public access, putting his face in the light where people could watch and judge. He was involved with local theater and an orphanage run by his uncle. Soon, dangerous whispers began circulating about his bisexuality and inappropriate advances toward teenage boys and young associates. Gossip, like that, possessed teeth, meant a rumor could destroy a person's safety, friendships, and entire standing in a single week. When a town turns against you, the walls close in fast, and the community becomes a trap. In 1910, Frank packed up his life and left Tennessee completely. He tried to outrun the whispers, but his behavior did not change, and the persistent rumors shadowed him. He ended up in small Midwestern communities like Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and Superior, Wisconsin. He met and married Ethel Marion Milne in Wisconsin. They eventually had a daughter, naming her Frances Ethel Gum, The name was a deliberate, direct tribute that blended both parents into the child's identity, which was a common practice for Vaudeville families who used names as anchors. Frances echoed Frank as a close tribute, and Ethel copied her mother exactly. But a carefully shared family name could not fix the growing danger outside their door. The family relocated from Grand Rapids to Superior around 1923, constantly moving because the scandal would not stay quiet. The small-town Minnesota and Wisconsin crowds watched the family closely. The exact same allegations surfaced again, this time pointing to Frank making advances on male ushers and teenagers working at his theater. The community response escalated into severe backlash and threats of arrest. Doors closed, people talked, and the danger grew. The family's life shrank into a repeating cycle of panic and packing. If you only see Judy Garland as a glamorous Hollywood legend, you miss the desperate engine that pushed her west. The family did not move to California simply to chase a bright movie dream. By June 1926, the persistent accusations in Grand Rapids reached a breaking point. Ethel faced a brutal choice that would shape her daughter's entire future. She could let the family face outright expulsion and public disgrace, or she could push forward using her daughter's vaudeville act as an escape route. She chose the stage. The family fled across the map to Lancaster, California, primarily due to the scandal. Frank leased Lancaster's Valley Theater in 1927 to manage a new stage farther from prying eyes. Lancaster offered a completely different crowd and a chance to break the chain of Midwestern gossip. The move was a rigid strategy for family survival. Ethel pushed the Gum sisters' vaudeville careers aggressively, turning constant travel and daily performance into a shield. Young Frances was caught right in the middle of these adult, emergency decisions. Her childhood was mapped by sudden relocations, broken routines, and shifting ground. She learned early that when the neighbors turn cruel, you keep the act going somewhere else. The stage was not merely a place to show off a talent to be admired, it was the one thing keeping her family moving forward while they outran a scandal. By 1934, the three sisters were performing heavily at the Oriental Theater in Chicago. They sang and smiled, doing everything right to win the room. Then the audience did something terrible. They laughed. They did not laugh at a crafted joke or a comedic line. They laughed right at the sound of the name Gum when the act was introduced. In the fierce, crowded competition of vaudeville, the wrong kind of laughter meant the audience had stopped trusting the performers. The name sounded clunky and sticky. It had even been disastrously misprinted once on a program as Glum, making the sisters look like a small-time sad act. Comedian and headliner George Jessel stepped in after the show with a fast, permanent solution. He told them the name was hurting them and suggested they change it to something elegant and stage-friendly. He offered the word Garland, a name he may have been inspired to use by a telegram mentioning the actress Judith Anderson or the critic Robert Garland. Ethel knew immediately that a bad brand was bleeding the act. She did not hesitate or argue to protect tradition. The family agreed instantly to drop the name that held their father's complicated history. By late August 1934, they debuted as the Garland Sisters. A single night of laughter triggered a massive identity shift executed at survival speed. Frances stepped back onto the stage under a completely new banner, carrying a name designed perfectly to sit on a theater marquee and stop the wrong laughter before it started. That shiny new name did not protect her from real tragedy. Frank was the one person standing directly between his daughter and the crushing weight of the industry. He fostered her early talent and created an atmosphere where she could flourish safely. But in 1935, Frank died of meningitis. He was 49 years old. Judy was only 13. The sudden loss devastated her completely. the only adult she trusted as an absolute protector, was gone, breaking the structure that held the young girl up. The stage did not close, the bills did not stop, and the demands from her mother did not slow down. Unresolved grief became a terrible weak spot. Without her father to shield her, the young teenager fell directly into Hollywood exploitation and abusive dynamics at MGM. Her phenomenal voice propelled her to massive fame, but the early loss left her terribly exposed to lifelong addiction, breakdowns, and a string of failed marriages. She entered the hardest years of her life totally unprotected. Judy Garland grew up to become a massive icon, yet she kept doing something in her private life that made people whisper behind closed doors. She married 5 different men, each relationship full of hope and chaos, but underneath the glamorous wedding dresses was a deeply hidden pattern. Several of her husbands were gay or bisexual. She married Vincente Minnelli, a man who was widely rumored to be bisexual. Later, she married Mark Herron, a man who eventually had a long-term male partner. Biographers and psychoanalysts point straight back to the first man she ever adored, her father. Young Frances had grown up watching her mother manage Frank's homosexual scandals and the resulting trauma. Ethel had responded to the crisis with tolerance and cover-ups. This taught a little girl a very specific lesson about how a household functions. She learned that a family could stay together by keeping the absolute truth quiet. She learned that an adult could smile in public while covering up a complicated private reality. When Judy became famous, she reached for relationships that felt oddly familiar. She developed a rescuer complex, trying to desperately save or normalize gay men through marriage. She mirrored her mother's enabling role, stepping into marriages where she had to hold the public story together while the private truth stayed safely out of sight. But Ethel only had to manage a small-town gossip circle. Judy had to manage the entire Hollywood tabloid machine. The stakes were infinitely higher, and the pressure turned covering up into a full-time job. Marriage cannot rewrite a childhood or cure old pain. It only revealed the wounds she already carried from a home built on secrets. Judy Garland's life did not begin with bright studio lights. It began with a packed suitcase. It began in towns like Grand Rapids and Superior, where a family ran from a growing scandal and used the Vaudeville stage as a desperate escape route. She inherited a soaring voice from a father who stepped out of a poor Tennessee hamlet, and she inherited a heavy silence from a home built on cover-ups. Before the world claimed her, she was Frances Ethel Gumm, a child whose very name was a private tribute to the 2 adults pulling her forward. When the harsh laughter of a Chicago crowd forced them to abandon that name, she took the stage as a Garland. The public got the polished legend. But the real story is the little girl who started performing at 2.5 years old to help her family survive. Long before anyone called her a star, she was already doing the only thing that kept her world from collapsing. She was walking into the spotlight.